Okay, so this is Ed Dixon speaking. I guess as I was counseled, I will start right on the hour. I would like to thank the Homeschool Conference for inviting me to present, and Debbie, you for being there to help me moderate. This is the first time I've done this type of presentation with Blackboard, so if there are any problems, I'll ask it, and if people cannot hear or have any questions or whatnot, they can, let me know as we go along. I mentioned before the presentation's, I think about a half hour, and then there's plenty of time for questions, and for the small enough group, we could have a discussion. It's interesting. This is, I understand, the inaugural online homeschool conference, so it's a great big launch, and for me, it's exciting as well. I've been in education 30 plus years, and tomorrow, actually, we launched the publication of the new book I have called Helping Boys Learn, and it's been a new pathway for me for about 5 years, and so it's now coming around to the start of the school time and learning time, and it's time for new beginnings, and so I'm excited to be able to share some things with you today. I have to admit, when I was doing some of the research and work, I hadn't thought a lot about homeschool or homeschooling parents. And I don't really know why, because, I have been a teacher and a principal and a researcher and working with boys, and I know that can be challenging in their learning in a school context. And I've also been a parent of boys on my own, and I know that can be challenging in a context. And so I imagine that I don't know if it becomes twice or exponentially as hard to actually have to teach your son yourself. But I know that there certainly are a lot of the same challenges that are found by both parents and teachers in those contexts. So my goal today is to be able to give you some good value in terms of understanding what the research I've done has revealed, and giving you some practical strategies, some things that you might be able to use even right away if you were doing anything with, trying to teach a boy tomorrow, you'd be able to use them. A few disclaimers, first of all. This is not meant to put girls off to the side, to disadvantage girls, to not be used in context with girls. These strategies, the things I'm going to talk about, can all work well with girls, but I have found that with boys, they do work very effectively. And they are meant to be used in the context of a learning situation where it would be, both genders and not just boys alone. But they can be used alone as well. And later I'll take any questions about that. But I really believe that this kind of focus, actually helping boys to become more engaged, better learners, is really good for girls too, particularly the girls that have to work or learn with them. So I think that's the start. And the other disclaimer is, I'm going to give you kind of an overview now. We have a website, we have a community that's free to join. You'll be able to access all of those things. If some of the questions I don't answer now, or if you have specific questions, my email address will be available, and you can email and contact me, and we can look at those questions that way. Okay, so I think I'll start. If Debbie, for some reason, people aren't seeing the slides as they go or whatnot, you let me know, but I will launch into it now. All right, so part of this is like, why do we need to focus on boys? Well, I knew from my 30 years in schools, and particularly in the end when I was a principal, that all of the things that you see here are just the tip of an iceberg of many challenges that boys have in learning. And I don't believe that these challenges were formally set forth, or that people are aware of the fact that maybe some of the things that are happening in learning are doing these to boys. Some people may be, some people may not. But the fact of the matter is we have a challenge with boys and now males underachieving in learning. And you may be familiar with some of the statistics which indicate that males dropout in these numbers here, but even in colleges and even in moving through higher education or even in higher training, males are often those who are not engaged or are not performing the way that they need to and often do drop out. There are some colleges in the United States that are very worried now about the ratio of males to females there, because males will enter and then drop out. And when it approaches 60 to 70% female, they know that they'll have a real problem, because women do not want to be at colleges where there aren't a lot of males, or there aren't enough males around for them to be able to interact with. So these are kind of global issues, and we may have people from other countries outside of North America. I have seen evidence of these kinds of challenges in all countries with boys. One of the things that we need to be able to do is to help boys to achieve these, all students, but boys in particular, to achieve these 21st century skills. And we know that a lot of the initiatives that are taking place now are trying to address that, some perhaps with more success than others. Quite frankly, if we've been following in North America the Common Core debate and the test score problems and things like that, there are lots of issues around that. But it is an initiative to somehow help students attain these skills, which those of you who are in the workforce now and have to work collaboratively know are vital skills. In the end, these are the kinds of things that the school system or the education that we provide to our children at home has to be able to prepare them for. And what we found is that for many women, it's entering kind of a really advantageous time. In the school systems, you may have been aware in the past that in the 90s, there was a big emphasis to help girls stay more engaged in school, particularly in the maths and sciences. And you'll see that that worked very well, because if you go to the National Science Fair or video website and whatnot, you'll see many, many more girls, young girls, real sharp girls, working in these areas where maybe they wouldn't have been, say, earlier on, because it wasn't appealing. And those things work really well. At the same time, though, because of the information age, a lot of the natural inclinations that boys have and whatnot sort of move to the back. The ability to work well collaboratively in a group, the ability to intuitively understand what other people might need, to lead in a team approach, to work with moderate effort over a long period of time. These are all qualities that, the research I've done has indicated that women really possess. Well, boys not as much. They can get there, but they need to be brought there. And so, if you know of Sheryl Sandberg, I think is the new CEO at Yahoo, and that whole idea of females leaning in, of really achieving, getting to a certain point that allows them complete participation. And I do believe that the glass ceiling is cracking even more with this because of the skills that females have. On the other hand, with boys, if boys don't find a place in society through their education, through the skills that they gain, we know that males make up the vast majority of those who are in our correctional facilities. And again, if you look even worldwide, a lot of the revolutions and a lot of the things that are happening are often happening or being led by males who are not part of the society directly. They may be well educated, they may not be, but they don't have full participation. But in North America, what I find as well is if you look down and you see that guy sitting there playing the video game, I'm willing to bet that there are people who are listening here who know of males who might be, in their 20s and 30s and should be doing more in terms of either working, supporting themselves, supporting others, but who, quite frankly, sometimes even end up sponging off the women that they live with, either their girlfriends, wives, or living with their parents. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of the things that came out when I was doing the research and we were doing the work in the schools seem to validate that there are certain things boys need that really help them to get past the problems and to perform at their highest levels. So what I've developed is an approach which is based on what we call 6 secrets. They're not secrets, but they're not often used as well, I find, in formal learning situations as they might be in other areas where males have been successful. And so if you look at this image here, you see that movement, game, and humor are on the outer periphery. They're the easiest things for to engage males in learning. And if you use those things, you can engage almost any male in learning very quickly. Inside, you get to more deeper skills, more challenging skills, the idea of challenge and mastery. Those are the things that engage boys for longer-term learning. And they're often very important to boys as they get older. But what they're really searching for, and I guess that's kind of a common life thing, is this idea of meaning and significance. And that if we're able to bring boys to an understanding of the meaning and significance of the learning that they have, then they can have significance themselves in their own minds and in their own lives. And I'm going to explain what that means as we go along a little bit here. Another way of looking at it is in this little pyramid here. We've got icons where we've got the movement, humor, and game at the bottom, and then going through challenge and mastery and up to meaning. So let's take a look at these secrets as they were. We know that boys love to move. Anyone who has had even children who are boys and girls can often see that from the earliest moments, boys really just are attached to movement. Well, there's really cool stuff out there that I discovered in the research about why this may be. If you look at this brain scan here, that's about an 11-year-old boy and girl at rest. And the white, puffy stuff are neural connections or neural activity happening. And we know from the brain research that we only really learn when we make a series of neural connections. And the more complex those connections are, the more we're learning. Well, here you have a boy and a girl. They're not asleep. They're sitting there. And yet the girl has tremendous activity, or a lot more activity happening within her brain on both sides of the brain. Whereas for the male, that white stuff at the bottom, that's brainstem function. That's like keeping you breathing and digestion. And whenever I show this in a larger group or whatnot, I have, women laughing and thinking of their husbands. When they look at this and they see, wow, look at that difference. And there's a reason for that difference. It has to do with the wiring. And as we age, it becomes more equal. But if you start out with a young boy, you will find that there's much less activity across what they call the corpus callosum in the brain, and much less activity in terms of verbalizing thought. So the female on the left-hand side is actually thinking, the research would indicate, is actually thinking in full sentences and words. Whereas the boy on the right will be able to do that, but that's not his initial departing point. When babies are born, there's certain types of brain wiring that come from both evolution and the actual physiology of boys and girls. And oops, I went one too far here. I'll just go back a second. And what they find is that boys hardwire much more earlier for one thing. And it's not what most people think of in our culture. It's actually for movement. And so what you see here is that boys have a tremendous amount of wiring for movement, so much so that when they've done experiments and they've put a couple babies in a crib, and it's a female baby, and they show a human face comes over the edge of the crib, and there's also a little metal mobile that rotates. The females almost invariably turn to the human face. The boys almost invariably turn and watch the mobile, which is amazing because at a week's or 2 weeks of age, all of your life is related to that mother, to that female face that might be coming there. But what are they looking at? They're looking at the shiny thing that's turning. And that's because their neural wiring causes them to pay more attention to that. Now, the thing is, you can imagine if you look at this kind of thing and you're sitting in a class, and even if a boy is sitting staring at you, Bill Cosby, U.S. comedian, used to have this thing about how he could be asleep with his eyes open. Well, I've seen that over and over, and as a male, probably partaken in it, where you're looking, but your brain is not engaged. But when males start to move, you see tremendous amounts of engagement in the brain. And so what we need to realize is that movement is unbelievably powerful, and when boys move, it really helps them to learn. But also the perception of movement is important, because people say, well, he can't sit still for 5 minutes when it's time to, just study some spelling words or whatnot, but he'll sit still for 2 hours and stare at the video screen. Yes, but he's not staring at a blank screen, or he's not even staring at the old Pong. He's staring at a very, very highly mobile series of images that as he moves through the game usually gets more complex. So what that means is that the movement is not just the physical movement, but also the perception of movement. And we could even say metaphorically for males, the perception of moving ahead. Here's one of the coolest things that I discovered in the research that I did, is that now they see connections between memory and the part of the brain that controls movement, or a lot of the movement, which is the cerebellum. And so basically, when they see people doing memory tasks and whatnot, they see parts of the cerebellum light up. So what that means is if you engage with movement at the same time, you can make a stronger neural connection. It's actually like layering on more neural connections that are there. So that's movement. And again, there's so much more I could go into, but I want to make sure I leave time for questions. I want to talk about perhaps a strategy. So, and this is one that a lot of people like. So you say, well, they want movement, but we can't have them hopping around, especially if I've got a number of kids I'm trying to teach or whatnot. It's very hard. And you can imagine there's a classroom teacher with 30 kids. What do you think? It's like, they're all popcorn and you just allow them to move around. Well, that's not the kind of movement that I would advocate in a larger setting. There's something here called still life, which some of you may know if you were in drama, called tableau, etc. But what this does is it allows males to use their bodies to learn. And let me give a few examples of what this looks like here. I'm going to see if I can just take where's my little pointer? There it is. Okay, so I'll start with a single child. So you're home teaching a single child. This is just taken last week. There's a little boy in Syracuse, and you know what he's doing there? He is frozen in a picture, and he is demonstrating precipitation, which is something he had to learn in his class. And to leverage that, he has to now tell whoever's watching exactly what he's doing with his body and why. And as he's doing that, he's actually creating more neural wiring for oral language. I didn't mention before, boys enter kindergarten in the school system about 18 months behind girls in oral language. So that old Charlie Brown thing of the blah, blah, blah teacher, well, that's how a lot of little boys hear, because they're missing a lot because their oral language is retarded or behind. So this boy here is actually creating that, but at the same time, and you could see from his face, he's concentrating. He really enjoys what he's doing. Over here, you see, this is, the Three Little Pigs. And they've created this, and what happens in here is they create the picture. So they had to read the story. They create the picture, and then they have to speak from where they are as to who they are and what they're doing and why. And what that does is that allows them to take the perspective of the characters of the story. And again, you may not be involved in any of the testing and whatnot goes on, but those are one of the things they test for is, can somebody take the perspective of somebody else and speak from that point of view? Well, what I believe, particularly for boys, is that if you give them that perspective, you allow them to speak in that perspective and then ask them to write, you're going to get much more because they actually have stronger neural connections around it. Here you see this is with teenagers, and this is actually showing, I think it was an algebraic equation. They were showing, I forget exactly what the algorithm was, but the teacher asked them to do it. And again, it was a physical use of the body that then they leveraged into doing the assignment. So it's not the end point, but it's sort of like a stopping point along the way. And just this little card over the right is a card that we've developed, which actually puts the strategy in kind of a little sequence so that you can make sure that you hit all the things you need to when you do the neural wiring. But still life is something you can use with your child tomorrow if you want to. There's no reason why not. Just find out what it is that you want them to learn and ask them to make a picture of it with their body, to freeze in a position. And I'll take questions on that after if you've got any. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Game. Now, we know boys love to play games, and I'm not sure here if I had a little more time, I might ask you to raise your hand. When I go into a room of 400 people and I say, who are these guys? I have only found, and I've done this about 20 times, I've only found twice that women raise their hand and tell me they know exactly who these two guys are here. But a ton of males, a lot of people who are males know who they are. And they're part of the Pardon, it's Will Bond and I forget the other guy. They're part of this Pardon the Interruption sportscast. You know, males like sportscast. But the thing about this is, it's not just a game like soccer or a game like video game, it's a game within a game. These guys not only talk about the games, you see they got baseball, football, hockey, etc. there, but they also play a game. They've got a timer and they're only given so many seconds to talk about each one of these things. And that's so typically male, so that you just can't have something. You have to actually create a game around it, right? And, you know, you might say, okay, well, that's fun, but think of it the other way. I mean, how often would you find that in some kind of programming for women? Like, can you imagine in Oprah them saying, okay, well, you had to leave him. Can you tell me why? You have 30 seconds, go. Like, that's insane. And that would be demeaning, and women, they wouldn't resonate at all. But with males, the time task is really, really powerful. And I'm going to explain why. This is one of the coolest things I discovered when I did the research. And I had worked in education for years. We know that males get testosterone. Well, testosterone makes males who they are in the womb, and we know what happens as they mature into teenagers. And we also know what happens when the girls get more testosterone in their system as they get to be teenagers as well. But they never have the level that boys have. What I discovered in the research was that boys about the age between 5 and 7 years of age, they start to get testosterone blasts, which for males makes you feel good. You know, I was reading an article yesterday about sports teams and how they've actually measured males' testosterone levels, and when they're watching their favorite sports team and they lose, they actually have lower testosterone levels afterwards. And for males, when you lose testosterone, you feel lousy. But when you get a blast of testosterone, you're like, yeah, I can do this. This is great. Well, males get that blast starting about 5 to 7 years of age when they set a goal and achieve it. And so here, if you know that, then you realize why games are so important. Because you set a goal in the game, and even if it's like on that television show, it's to talk about the New York Yankees in 30 seconds and get all the facts in. And if you do that, then in essence you win. But it's not so much about winning, it's about how you feel after that you set this goal and you achieved it. And again, I can't go into it. There's lots of evolutionary reasons that are really cool as to why this happens. But indeed it does happen. So if you are teaching a boy and you understand that, then you can do things that help. The downside of that is that, and I saw this about 8 years of age or so, grade 3, where I was a school principal, I have all these boys flooding my office, either getting in trouble, fighting, or just checking out, not doing work. And I now know that that was the fight or flight response. In other words, they actually needed to start to have some wins in the classroom. And if they didn't, they either caused trouble because they were frustrated, caused trouble in class or on the yard, or they just checked out. Because that's another way males avoid having that testosterone loss. And if you have tried to teach a boy who's, you know, recalcitrant, and it's like, I don't want to do it. I can't do it. I can't, right? They'll often say that, but often that's a protective mechanism because they're really scared that they would fail at something and they don't want to feel lousy. And the more often a boy has failed in a school context, I used to teach high school in a tough inner city neighborhood. Man, when those boys arrived to me, they were done. They had had so many physiological instances of failure that there was no way that I was going to convince them that they could achieve at something. It really had to be that they had those experiences themselves, which were harder to come by in a formal high school setting, that showed that they were successful. So, how do you use game if you are working with your child, say, at home? Well, we have this thing called back and forth. And back and forth is a really simple thing, which you say one word at a time, back and forth, and you're able to accomplish what you wanted to set out. So, for example, if you were learning if you were an 8-year-old and you had to learn a triangle has 3 sides and 3 vertices, you could do it back and forth, where you and a parent or a friend could go back and forth, so that one person would say A, the other would say triangle, the next one would say has, and so on. And then if you look on the right, we have that back and forth card. You can reverse this, and you can literally create really cool neural connections for males very quickly as they play a game going back and forth. And this boy here was really cool because he was one of these guys in school that had the assistant following him around all the time, and he did I had gone there in October, he had done no writing for 6 weeks. And there he is. Look at the smile on the guy's face. There he is, having written, and that took 20 minutes. He played the game, and immediately after playing the game, we set up another game and said, okay, you and your friend, let's see who can write what you just said as quickly as possible. And they sat next to each other, and they played this game. And then when the teacher or his parent would praise him for this, it's not the fakey praise that sometimes we give kids because we want them to feel better. He actually accomplished something. And for a male, that makes all the difference because it affects their physiology. They know when they're not accomplishing things, and people telling them, oh, well, you can do this. If they have physiological evidence that they can't, they're not going to believe it, even if it comes from somebody whom they really love. Okay, if we move to humor, the word puerile comes from the Greek word or Roman word for boy. That's about all you need to know. And if you think about some of the male movies and things like that, males, have a sense of humor that sometimes is not always appreciated in the larger culture. But what I found out was that humor has really important learning abilities for males. First of all, there is, and again, it's in the book. There's an evolutionary psychologist who's done some really cool research, in which he shows that he believes humor evolved to help, particularly males, survive on the savannah, where you had to pay attention in this kind of boring environment where you're walking along, because if you didn't, you'd either miss the prey you were looking for, or you'd become the prey. And so when you have humor, automatically it focuses boys' attention better. And if you think, or that if you were a male, or you think of a boy that many of the teachers who are their favorite teachers are the ones who have a good sense of humor. And part of it is it helps them to focus with that. But even more importantly, humor is a way that boys socially bond with others. It's not uncommon to perhaps have a grade 5 girl or 6 girl sit down with her girlfriends and say, it's really nice to be with you guys. No boy says that. He'd be loath to say that. So what does he say? How you doing, you jerk? Or they make some joke, right? That's how males interact, because when they're joking and even saying things that appear terribly crude, they're actually saying to each other, hey, it's good to be with you now. And you see that everywhere where males congregate, that they don't, as you get older, sure, you're a 50-year-old male, you'd be able to do that, but most 12-year-old boys are not going to be able to do that. Finally, though, humor actually makes hard tasks manageable. In other words, boys often use humor when they're scared. And so it's a way to deflect attention away from something they fear they're not going to be able to do. That's that whole sense of gallows humor, which again, you don't find so much among females, but you find it all over among males, making these jokes that, in real dire times, that they say something that's going to cause a joke. Like I remember the story of Ronald Reagan when he was shot and he went into the operating room and said to the doctors, well, I hope you're all Republicans. And here's a guy shot and, dying on there. He goes, oh, well, what a great guy. But that's a male thing. Males do that often. But if you know that, and if you've got a boy who often distracts by humor, especially when the going gets tough for learning, then you can flip that around. And here's one way you can do that. This is called slow-mo. I don't know why this works so well. It's hilarious. Is you ask boys, again, to take whatever they're supposed to be learning and to render it in slow motion. I couldn't figure out how to upload the video here, but there's one of these they'll be on the site starting the end of next week, those boys there. They were doing with the solar system, and what they had to do was to show the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And one guy was the sun slowly expanding his heat and whatnot, and the other guy was rotating around. And you look at their faces, they're just having a great time. But what the mom did is then she froze them, and she asked them questions, and they couldn't start the slow motion again until they actually had explained what they were doing and why it was important. And of course, the way to follow this is immediately go into some writing. And so what you had were these boys looking at something and seeing, oh, this is really cool. This is something that I could pay more attention to. And what you often find, which comes in our mastery, is that once they do this, they actually want to work harder on it because they want to make it funnier. And all you do is set a criteria that, well, it can be funnier, but it has to have the information that we require in it. And they will go along with that. So if we look at where we are now, we've done the outside things. If you have a boy age 2 to, I don't know, 16, probably less so maybe when they're a little older, but certainly younger, those outside things, right away, it's a way to link them right into learning. But they can't stay there. Boys need to move to the higher levels because that's where they will really achieve what they're searching for, which are the skills to be significant in the world. So this is challenge. Boys love things that are challenging, and now if we understand the testosterone blast, we know why. And they'll even put themselves into situations you wouldn't think of. Look at these two teenage guys. Now, if you had said, oh, we want you to stand with this big stuffed toy to your average, 15-year-old, no way. But you know what? That stuffed toy represents that they met the challenge in a video game. I think it's Pikachu. I'm not sure which it is, but look at their faces, right? And so they will do many things if they can meet a challenge. And those guys are full of testosterone right now because they just won whatever the stuffed toy was representing in terms of videotape. And so boys often look for challenges and set them because they want to achieve things. The trick for learning is to have them use this in the learning we need them to do. But for a lot of that, they need to be able to have some freedom to a certain extent, even to set the challenges they need. And there's got to be a framework. And really quickly, this ring toss was a fascinating thing. That was done, I think, an experiment at the University of Pennsylvania, where they took males and females, college students, and they brought them into a room, and it was just a little ring toss sitting there, nothing else, in a chair, and said, okay, can you toss the rings onto the ring toss goal? That's it? Yeah, that's it. Well, most of the girls, the women, did just that. They did it. They stood over it, stood away a bit perhaps, tossed them on, say, is that it? You want me to do it again? No, that's okay. Not one male did that. What the males did is they started moving further back, turned around to try and throw it from behind their back. One guy opened up the door to step out into the hall so he could throw it from that far away. And the question is, well, why? Why couldn't they just do what they were asked to do? Well, they wanted a challenge. They didn't think it would be enough of a challenge to just stand there and toss the rings on. And so that's the kind of thing that you'll often find boys looking for, even in a negative sense. When you find boys pushing back or causing trouble in a social context or whatnot, often they're trying to set a challenge. And if the challenge is, how many things can I do before my sister whines? Hey, it works. And so what we want to do is to see if we can redirect those things into the areas that we'd like them to happen. this is a really good one, and if you work with boys any time, you know this works. You set a time for the tasks that you have, and it can't be really long. It's got to be short. But when you do that, they will work really hard for that focused period of time. And there's other evolutionary reasons because of that. But the bottom line is that the research is pretty clear that if you put moderate time pressures on male, their performance goes higher. If you do that for females, their performance goes slower, goes lower. Even in those tests like the SAT or whatnot, we have a long period of time. It's still, for boys, the timing seems to work better. And I think that's, again, setting out a challenge. So if you can test this at home. Try this at home. Try this with your son and give him something that you know that he could do in a minute or two that's related to work, and say, okay, we're going to time it and see what happens. Okay, mastery. Anybody who's been around males for any significant amount of time know that we sort of have control issues sometimes. And part of it comes from the fact that males are very interested in controlling the universe for, I think, natural, physiological, and neuroscience reasons. But that you're not the boss of me, or you can't tell me what to do. I heard that. I had many kids come and visit me in the office who told their teacher and were promptly shown that they could be the boss of them because they weren't in the classroom anymore. But we know from the research, too, that boys will generally, I call it the driving without directions thing for males. Boys will generally not ask for help when they need it. They want to do it on their own. One of the reasons I think this happens, and this is part of a theory that I'm developing, is that for years, for millennia, when males learned things, they had to be learning, like on the savannah, where their skills were really important, and that what they learned had to be really functionally useful. And if it wasn't functionally useful, it wasn't really contributing to the tribe or wherever they were. And more often from boys and girls, you'll hear, like, why do we have to learn this? Why do I have to know this? It's that whole idea of what is it good for? And then females ask a different question. They often ask, how do I relate to it? How does this fit into the larger context, etc.? Males almost only ask this question. If you want to see that among young boys, take their favorite car and ask them, yeah, what do you like about this? And it'll all be functional. It'll all be stuff it can do. It goes real fast. It bumps really good. It sounds really loud. It's rarely that, it's really good to get people to work. That's not something that they often say. And so mastery was attained by males in those days by actually being mentored or coached into how you are good with things, you learn the skills to do it. So that boy didn't get to throw that spear, at least in the hunt, until he had really mastered the skills. Because, the community was relying on these males to be able to do that. So as this is a more complex skill, we have a plan. I can't go into it here because I'm running out of time now, but basically what we've set up is that you can get mastery. You start with his interests in mastery, and I'll explain that briefly. If you go, we have a video that's sitting on the site, doesn't cost anything, you'd be able to go there and see a mom talking to a boy about how he got good in a video game. And you start to discuss that with him, and then you start to lead him to a point where he's talking about how he could get better, how he could attain mastery. And you get him thinking about, well, to get good at something, it takes work, it takes practice, it takes etc. But he's more interested in that because it's something he's interested. Then you move it through your own interests. In other words, well, it's in your interest to have him clean up his room in the morning, and you work on a mastery plan for that. And then finally, the mastery in the subject matter comes. But it has to come that way because it's what we call discretionary effort. It's that extra effort that boys are putting in. Okay, and the final one, and I'll probably spend the least time on this, although it's the most important, is meaning. Its significance. Remember I said boys ask the question, what's it good for? Well, they ask an even more profound question about themselves. What am I good for? In other words, what significance do I play in the world? Every boy wants to be a hero. And much of the terrible negativity we see in the world is boys trying to be a hero in the wrong way. And yet we need heroic men. We need boys who can show all the potential they have inside them. But unless a male has that understanding, then he won't use it. This boy, who was the last boy I talked to before I left my role as a principalship, he sat in my office one day after he was brought down, the day before he graduated in grade 8. And I knew this kid because I talked to him lots of time. We were friends. He'd been in a play I'd done, etc. And, you know, I was trying to say, come on, Chad, you can do this work, etc. And I don't know what it was, but he stopped me. He said, stop, Mr. Dixon. And his eyes got all watery. And he said, let's face it, I'm stupid. You know it, I know it, and my parents know it. And then he wouldn't look at me anymore. He did what I asked him to, but he wouldn't talk again. And I'm thinking, you know, that kid's going to graduate. He's going to go to high school. He's going to stay in high school if that's his profound belief about himself. Because he can't find significance for himself in what he's doing in school. Whereas when it does happen, this is another true story, a guy who did nothing all through high school when I taught there, and then came back in the last year, and he was like a D student, E student, and he comes back and he's acing math and science, stuff he never did. What happened? Well, in the summertime, he rode with his cousin who was an EMT, an emergency services guy, and he said, you know, this is what I want to do. This is where he could find his significance. And the guy said, well, you got to take math and science in college. And that was the only thing it took to change. None of the teachers changed that. It was that perception there. So the question is, how do we help boys get to meaning? Well, the way you do it is by showing them how they can be of service in what they learn. Because boys are dying to give. A lot of people say boys are selfish. It's absolutely, it's incorrect. They just need to be able to understand how they can give. And so some of the techniques that we've got are, once a boy learns something, have him share it and teach someone else. Here's one technique here. So here he's telling his grandfather something that he learned. Here's another one. Have him create a little YouTube video about his skills. There are actually 8 and 10-year-olds on YouTube that actually create videos about how to play video games that other 8 and 10-year-olds watch. I didn't know this until just recently, but evidently that's the case. And of course, here we have an older high school student helping to teach. He might not be that good in math, but he's better than this guy, and he can mentor him in some of the skills he's learned. These are all ways to find meaning. So if we look at, again, our target, we see that we go from easily accessible, quick, easy ways to do things to more complex things, but it's a natural, logical path. And it's one that's kind of spiraling, and different kids start at different places. I'm going to open up for questions in a second, but I just wanted to mention a couple of things. If you would like, you go to helpingboyslearn.com/homeschool. I've set this up. I'll put the link in afterwards. You can take a 3-minute quiz that tells which of these 6 secrets the boy that you're thinking about might work best. And if you do that, you're able to access the chapter on that, i.e., if it comes out that game is really the best place to start for him to learn, you'll be able to access that chapter complimentary through the website. And so that's one thing that you can do to see, sort of test this, see if this has any validity to you. The second thing I've set up is that I've got 2 books, a parent and a teacher edition, but then I think, well, what do you do for homeschoolers? So just in short, what I'm saying is that if a parent in the end decides, if you decide through this conference you want to buy the book, I'll send you all the teacher strategies too, because a lot of the research is the same in both books. It's the strategies that are different. And quite frankly, I don't know which one would work in a homeschool environment, so I'd love to have people try them and use that in that context. Okay, I'm sorry that I rushed through that so fast. I'm willing to take questions or talk about anything. Debbie, do you have any suggestions as to how I should do this?
You can ask them. They can choose the raise hand icon in the participant window, and they can ask questions. I know that Judy had a question on one of your slides that she was wondering if you would post the link for. And let's see, Judy, do you want to, let me look back in the thing to see which one it was. Hold on. It was the slide that had still life on it. I think you had a link on there that she would like to have posted in the chat.
Okay, sure. I can put that in, and if yes, I'll definitely put that in, and people can always they can contact me directly through the website as well if I don't give them exactly what they want there, so that's fine. Any other questions or comments? Anything that struck you, Debbie?
Well, I have an 11-year-old hyperactive boy at home, and I think some of these strategies are going to work really well, and I homeschool, so I'm very interested to definitely take a look at the book.
In your context, do you teach him alone, or does he learn in the context with other kids?
We do both. I work with him alone, and then I also homeschool other students on different days of the week, so he does get the socialization aspect of it. But I teach multi-age groups, so I teach 9 to 13, and it's not all boys. As a matter of fact, a lot of it is mostly girls with him, but I still think that these strategies could work with both boys and girls. I think they seem like they would be really effective.
Right, and I didn't mention that I think one of the things this can help, particularly for girls going in, if we get this, see, I've got this whole North American initiative on this, but if we get it working where boys are really more actively engaged at school at a younger age, then you might not see this phenomena that you find with girls in early high school years where they sort of pretend they're not so smart because they think that boys don't necessarily value that. You know, rather have it switched around where the boys are really looking for the smart girls.
Is there anyone else who would like to raise a hand and take the mic? I can open mic privileges if someone had a question for Dr. Dixon.
I would ask too, if anyone knows, or through you, Debbie, and they can email me, you know, it's really my first foray into working with homeschooling groups, and the sense I had, I did talk to a mom who homeschooled before I went on, and she said, yeah, I think that this could be useful, so that if there are any places that it's good to reach out or contact them or make them aware, I'd certainly appreciate knowing that.
A lot of homeschoolers belong to homeschool co-ops or work with a wider range of people, and so I most definitely will make sure that people find out about your book. I work with some charter schools as a vendor for their homeschool program, so I do think that this is a great resource for parents of boys.
And are there conferences like where homeschoolers get together and talk about things that work and don't, etc.?
Well, I live in Los Angeles, and on Wednesdays we have what we call Homeschool Day, and it's all activities, and kids get an opportunity to play together. Some people still offer classes on that day. And then I also belong to another group where it's classes all day together on Thursday. So there's a lot of situations like that, I think, across the country where it's a co-op where parents are teaching their children and other people's children as well.
And this is something I guess I could have mentioned. I do mention the community context. I don't have a group. I've worked with other groups. I don't have a group of homeschoolers that I'm sort of doing work with where they're trying it and then they get back and say, oh, well, that didn't work so well. What about this? If there's anyone like that, they can certainly let me know, and I'd love to be able to be a resource that way, you know, at no cost to people to be able to, because I'm curious. It is a different dynamic, I would imagine. And so I think some of the things might need some tweaking.
I know for me that I would love to do it. I teach I teach different age groups. I teach, like I said, a multi-age class 9 to 13, And then I teach what's called a scholar class, which is 13 to 18-year-olds, which is mostly boys in the older group. So I would be curious to know if you feel that these sort of strategies can be used with boys at any age, or if you feel they are better used with the younger age.
I think I would use those that are closer to the center of the circle with the older boys. I mean, humor, as you know, is a teenage boys, etc. But if they're, what I find is, and this is what the quiz often tells, if they're they're pretty good about doing their stuff themselves, they like school, etc. The stuff in the middle help them to really bring their game. A lot of guys coast, right? They're just there. They do what they need to do to make whoever needs to be happy, happy. But it's that kind of passion inside that drives them to the reason why they might spend 2 hours on a skateboard outside. That's where I think for those older kids to unlock that passion if they don't have it, or to help them become more skilled. And I think, yes, that's where it can help. Let me ask this too. So I know other people now will be able to go back and review this presentation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so will it sit in a general place, or will it sit where my page is, or should I link? I'd like to link to it even from my website. I'm
certain if you talk with Steve that he can make that possible for you to have it available on your website.
And this is the first kind of worldwide online homeschool conference, is that true?
Can you repeat that?
This is the first worldwide homeschool online conference?
It is the first homeschool conference that Steve Hargadon has put together, and I know that he has plans of doing a second one. So it would be nice to have you come back and present again.
No, I'd love to. And I've already mentioned that if you'd like, you'd help on the board of advisors, I'd be happy to do that if it's of any service to them.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Dixon?
I appreciate all the kind comments. I'm glad to hear that it can be helpful. I suspected there might be some, but this is good. It's a nice confirmation. Yes, in a Kindle format. We are launching tomorrow. I'm waiting some books to come in, and the ebook is supposed to be ready in a few days. My hope is by midweek, so that if we've got this discount now, if people pre-order either the ebook or the soft cover copy, we'll make sure it gets out to them right away, and I think it's a 20% discount for publishers per line. Oh, so the ebook, you go to the website. So if you go to helpingboyslearn.com, it'll kind of send you right there, and you'll be able to find that. And if you go to the /homeschool, you'll be able to get that chapter emailed if you'd like to get that even beforehand. Sure, it's working. There it is. Good.
Well, if we don't have any more questions, then we'll close this session out and prepare this room for the next speaker. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's been wonderful, and thanks for moderating, Debbie. And it sounds like a really cool thing. I'm looking forward to learning more about the kinds of stuff you guys do with your kids, and what it's like to be a homeschooling parent. How long have you done it for?
I have been homeschooling now. This will be my 3rd year. I'm actually a certified teacher that taught in both public and private schools. And when I found out my son had dyslexia and had some learning challenges, we decided to homeschool. And I feel like it has been the best situation. I've learned so much.
Oh, isn't that neat? Well, again, thanks for moderating today. Thanks for everyone who participated. And thanks to Steve and the team for allowing me to be here.